I turned exactly 30 on the day the tires of the old passenger plane shrieked loudly against the sun-baked asphalt of the runway in Manila. I had grown up in dreary, perpetually damp Seattle, where life passed in endless shades of gray among the glass facades of skyscrapers and the cold detachment of the metropolis. Following the sudden passing of my parents, I was left completely alone in the vast world. My small architectural firm went bankrupt, piles of unpaid studio rent stacked up on my desk, and a deep, burning inner loneliness had become my only constant companion. I felt like a man with nothing left, no goals, no loved ones, no future. The only anchor keeping me from slipping completely into the abyss of despair was my grandfather's worn wooden chest. He had been a World War II veteran. Among yellowed newspaper clippings, old medals, and dried wildflowers, I found three things: a small leather-bound notebook, an antique brass key coated in patina with intricate engravings, and a slightly faded black and white photograph dated the summer of 1945. It captured a young Philippine woman with a remarkably radiant, open smile holding a small child in her arms in front of a modest bamboo house with a thatched nipa roof. On the back, in my grandfather's trembling hand, was written, "I gave my oath to return and repay the debt for saving my life. If death takes me first, fulfill it for me, my boy." The journey from the capital to a small province on the island of Leyte took nearly a full day. The rickety, non-air-conditioned interprovincial bus bounced heavily over potholes, while outside the window, emerald rice paddies, orderly coconut groves, winding rivers cutting through the jungle, and smiling faces of locals waving at the passing bus replaced one another. The heat and humidity were suffocating, but when I finally stepped off the bus at the dusty, sun-drenched intersection of a tiny town, what struck me first was not the heat, but an incredible, enveloping, and immensely appetizing aroma wafting from a small wooden shed by the roadside. It was a local carinderia, a modest street eatery humming with life. My stomach responded with a painful, loud rumble, as I hadn't eaten in almost a day and a half. Noticing my bewildered, exhausted look and the heavy backpack on my shoulders, an elderly woman with kind eyes framed by crow's feet and a warm gaze waved her hand, inviting me to take shelter in the shade. Her name was Ate Linda. Without the slightest hint of wariness or distrust toward a stranger, she seated me at a clean wooden table and instantly set a deep clay bowl in front of me, steam rising from it. "Try it, son. You really need this right now." "It's sinigang na baboy," she said in soft, lilting English with a distinct Philippine accent. Authentic, proper broth with tamarind, pork ribs, radish, and fresh vegetables. You need to gather your strength after a long journey. I took a first sip of the hot broth, and it felt as if a powerful electric surge coursed through my exhausted body. An incredible sour and savory flavor profile, fresh water spinach shoots, melt-in-your-mouth pork, and a light, refreshing citrus fragrance of calamansi. It was unlike any food I had ever tasted in the West. In this seemingly simple homemade soup, there was a profound, genuine care and warmth that I hadn't felt since early childhood. When I finished every last drop and tried to pay by reaching into my pocket for dollar bills, Ate Linda merely offered a kind, gentle wave of her hand. "Later, my dear. Eat properly first, rest from your trip. In the Philippines, a guest never stays hungry or lonely." Her sincere, selfless hospitality melted the heavy ice that had bound my chest for years. Yet, the purpose of my visit here was far from basic culinary tourism. Pulling the 1945 photograph from a protective envelope, I showed it to Linda and her husband, a local woodworker. Upon seeing the image, the woman gasped in shock and covered her mouth, while her husband, white-haired Uncle Bert, frowned, instantly grew stern, and exchanged an anxious look with his wife. "That's the old Talay family home," Bert said softly, almost in a whisper, looking around. "But you'd better not look for that place, son. 20 years ago, their ancestral estate burned to the ground under very strange and terrifying circumstances. People in town spoke of arson. The woman in this picture passed away long ago, and her only granddaughter, Tala, is barely making ends meet, living on the very edge of the village. But most importantly, powerful land developers from the capital have been trying for years to seize that coastal plot by force and deception. Any outsider who shows the slightest interest in the Talay land quickly finds themselves in very deep trouble. These alarming words did not frighten me. Instead, they ignited a stubborn fire within. I hadn't traveled to the other side of the world merely to repay forgotten debts of the past. In that moment, I distinctly felt that my grandfather's fate was intertwined with a dark, dangerous, and still unsolved mystery of this land. Early the next morning, following Uncle Bert's rambling directions, I headed to the farthest outskirts of the town. The trail wound through dense thickets of bamboo, blooming hibiscus, and broad banana trees. On a small rise, right at the edge of the emerald jungle, nestled a modest yet impeccably neat house made of bamboo poles and dried nipa palm leaves. Sitting on the wide bamboo porch was a young woman. Her dark, silky hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and while deep exhaustion showed in her brown eyes, there was also a remarkable, proud independence and an unshakable inner core. This was Tala. When I approached the porch, bowed, and carefully handed her my grandfather's yellowed notebook and the old photograph, she remained silent for long minutes, gazing at the familiar features in the picture. Then her eyes filled with held-back tears and unmistakable wonder. As it turned out, her grandmother had cherished the memory of the American soldier she had helped survive in the jungle until her very last day, believing that justice would eventually prevail. But the initial joy of our meeting gave way all too quickly to an anxious shadow across her face. Tala invited me inside and shared that her family had kept an old historical document for 3 generations, an official title granting ownership of a vast stretch of coastal land, where a powerful corporation was currently preparing to build an elite resort complex. A very wealthy and influential developer named Mr. Mendoza is trying every possible way to take our land, Tala said, her voice laced with bitterness and pain, as she served me a plate of freshly cooked, spice-fragrant chicken adobo. He brazenly claims that all our original papers burned during that terrible fire 20 years ago. But I know the documents survived and were hidden by my grandfather. However, without the official seal of the historical archives and proof of authenticity, we are completely powerless against his bought lawyers in court. As we spoke, I found it impossible to tear myself away from the dish Tala had prepared. The rich, sensational sauce made of local cane vinegar, soy sauce, fresh garlic, black peppercorns, and bay leaves had infused the tender, fall-off-the-bone meat so perfectly that every bite tasted like a true culinary masterpiece. In this simple, honest country food, one could feel the depth and soul of a people capable of preserving incredible warmth, love, and dignity, even in the face of mortal danger and blatant injustice. The residents of the small village soon learned of the outsider's arrival at Tala's home. Instead of treating a stranger with suspicion or fear, they welcomed me as one of their own family. Every day, neighbors voluntarily brought me ripe mangoes as sweet as honey, treated me to crispy homemade vegetable lumpia rolls, and served delicate halo-halo desserts topped with bright purple ube ice cream and sweet beans. With my own eyes, I witnessed how these modest people, despite grueling labor and meager means, were always genuinely ready to share their last bowl of hot rice with a neighbor. They truly lived in the spirit of ancient barangay and bayanihan traditions, a unique Philippine custom of mutual assistance where an entire community unites in a single, unbreakable surge of kindness and support. Looking into Tala's shy yet hopeful eyes, I firmly vowed to myself and to my grandfather's memory that I would do everything possible to protect her. The next day, I went to the town hall. Utilizing my professional skills as an architect and my knowledge of urban planning law, I attempted to request historical land maps of the region from the previous century. However, as soon as I submitted a written request and began asking questions about the boundaries of the Talay family property, A tall, polished man in an expensive business suit approached me in the narrow archive hallway, Mr. Mendoza's senior attorney. "Mr. Architect, you are way out of your depth and sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," he said coldly, an overt threat in his voice as he conspicuously flashed the gold watch on his wrist. "This region is undergoing active development. 5-star hotels will stand here. If you don't cease your pointless searches immediately, you'll face severe issues with immigration, and the Tilley family will face serious problems regarding their personal safety." When I returned to the village late that evening, after long and fruitless rounds through bureaucratic offices, I was horrified to find that my modest room at the local guest house had been brutally ransacked. The locks were broken, my architectural tablet and backpack were ripped to shreds, and most importantly, my grandfather's yellowed notebook containing historical records was gone without a trace. Losing my grandfather's notebook was a devastating emotional blow that briefly plunged me into despair. But the attackers and their employers had overlooked one vital detail. The antique brass key my grandfather had worn around his neck during the war had remained with me the entire time. I had hung it on a sturdy cord and worn it right beneath my shirt, close to my heart. I remembered every line from the notebook by heart, and on its very last page, my grandfather had written a cryptic phrase: "If a dark hour comes, seek salvation beneath the roots of the mother tree, where the kare matures." Realizing that time had run out, I immediately gathered Tala, Uncle Bert, and the most respected elders of the village. We met secretly and ate Linda's spacious kitchen. The atmosphere in the room was tense to the limit. Mendoza's aggressive developers had delivered an official notice to the Tilley family. They had exactly 3 days before heavy construction equipment would arrive to evict them. Yet instead of panic and fear, the Philippine community chose to display its defining qualities: an unshakable resilience of spirit, courage, and absolute unity. "We will never give up our ancestors' land without a fight," Tilley said firmly, looking at me with such tenderness, gratitude, and trust that my breath hitched sweetly. Over these remarkably intense days, something greater than mere affection had blossomed between us. It was a deep, pure, and powerfully ignited feeling unlike anything I had ever experienced in my entire past life. To distract the attention of Mendoza's armed guards who constantly patrolled the village entrance in jeeps, the village elders and I devised a clever plan to host a grand, lively traditional village festival, a fiesta. The entire village, without exception, joined in preparing this massive diversion. From early morning, I personally helped Linda and Tala cook the central feast dish, traditional kare kare. For hours in massive copper cauldrons, we simmered oxtail and tender beef in a thick, remarkably fragrant peanut sauce, complemented by fresh vegetables, eggplant, long beans, and savory bagoong shrimp paste. Cooking over an open fire beneath the canopy of tropical trees, the loud, genuine laughter of the women, the warm jokes of the elders, and the ringing sound of children running around the tables created a magical atmosphere of absolute brotherhood. As I helped stir the simmering, rich sauce, I looked at these wonderful, open-hearted people and clearly understood. I was ready to defend their home, their land, and their smiles with my very life. Late at night, with the fiesta in full swing and the loud music, karaoke singing, and laughter distracting the mercenaries at the town entrance, Tala, Uncle Bert, and I quietly slipped through the dense brush toward a deserted grove at the far edge of the property. There, right by the cliff overlooking the ocean, stood a massive, ancient mango tree, the very mother tree my grandfather had written about. Armed with shovels, we began digging carefully in total darkness between the giant, intertwined roots. My heart hammered in my chest like mad, and sweat stung my eyes. At a depth of nearly 3 feet, the metal blade of the shovel struck a heavy object with a dull, metallic clink. Clearing the earth away with our hands, we lifted a rusted yet wax-sealed lead container of military issue to the surface. On its top lid was a tight keyhole. With a holding breath, I took my grandfather's brass key from around my neck and inserted it into the slot. The key turned with a creak, clicked twice, and the lid gave way. Inside the container, preserved in flawless condition, lay original 19th century Spanish and Philippine land deeds stamped with official seals, along with an official letter from my grandfather addressed to the military command and local administration, fully verifying the Talay family's rightful ownership. But as we raised our heads in joy, four shadowy figures holding high-powered spotlights and flashlights were already surrounding us from all sides. Stepping out from behind the trunk of the mango tree was Mr. Mendoza himself, accompanied by two local police officers he had bought off, both carrying weapons. "I am forced to disappoint you, foreigner. Hand over that box," Mendoza said coldly and arrogantly, pulling a fraudulent demolition order from his pocket. "You are an outsider here with no rights, and your decayed papers mean nothing against my billions and connections." At that critical, seemingly hopeless moment, people suddenly began emerging from the darkness of the night jungle. It was not armed guards, but the entire village without exception. Hundreds of residents, men, women, teenagers, marched forward carrying lit torches, cooking pots, and most importantly, active smartphones broadcasting the entire encounter live to a social media audience of millions. Leading the procession with fierce determination was Ate Linda, holding a huge wooden ladle in her hands. Beside her walked the mayor of the neighboring large provincial district, who had been summoned by the village elders, an honest, respected man and an old comrade in arms of Uncle Bert. The ordinary villagers' absolute refusal to back down, their unshakable solidarity, mutual restraint, and the overwhelming force of truth instantly shattered the developer's arrogant bluff. Seeing dozens of phone camera lenses pointed at him alongside official representatives of the provincial government, the police officers panicked about accountability and flatly refused to carry out Mendoza's illegal verbal orders. Right before the camera lenses, the newly discovered historical documents from the lead container were solemnly handed over to the mayor and the legal officers from the State Land Committee who had arrived with him. Truth had triumphed, completely and irreversibly. The Talay family's ancestral land was forever protected under the laws of the Philippines. As the humiliated Mendoza and his cowardly henchmen slunk away in disgrace to the deafening, triumphant cheers of the entire village, dawn began to break over the horizon. The first brilliant rays of the tropical sun filtered through the lush canopy of the mango trees, painting the sky and the ocean bay in breathtaking shades of gold, purple, and rose. The overjoyed villagers threw a magnificent celebration right out in the open air. Long wooden tables groaned under the weight of traditional feasts. In the center sat a succulent roasted lechon pig with gold and crispy skin. Clay bowls filled with aromatic arroz caldo rice steamed nearby. Freshly caught seafood grilled over coals was served alongside massive pots of the sour and savory sinigang soup that had once taught me how to feel the flavors of life again. I stood right in the heart of this radiant celebration of life, watching the people dance, and felt warm tears flowing uncontrollably down my cheeks. But these were no longer tears of loneliness, pain, or sorrow that I had carried in my broken heart for the past 30 years. They were pure, soul-cleansing tears of absolute, indescribable happiness and profound gratitude to destiny. Tala walked slowly through the celebrating crowd toward me, carrying a small clay bowl of hot sinigang. She looked gently into my eyes, and in her deep, sincere gaze, the entirety of this beautiful, kind, invincible, and generous world of the Philippine people was reflected. "You came to our island only to repay an old debt for your grandfather," she whispered softly yet clearly, tenderly resting her warm palm against my hand. "But tell me, will you stay here now for yourself?" I tightly intertwined my fingers with hers, feeling my entire being fill with incredible, all-encompassing warmth. For the first time in my 30 years, I knew the answer with complete and unshakable certainty. I had flown halfway across the planet and found more than just a point on a geographic map. I had found my true, only home, my genuine love, and a vast, devoted family among these extraordinary, luminous people whose genuine kindness and warmth could melt even the deepest darkness.